Well, welcome back. I hope the first episode in this little two-part was good, and I hope it brought you back for the second part. But yeah, thanks for tuning in again. Um, and just to let you know, for those of you who maybe had seen this as one episode, I had deleted the longer episode after discovering that the audio was terrible on it. Hopefully, this is turning out better. I think the first one did for sure. Um, but so, what I want to do is just jump in again, and again talking about transgender accommodation and Christian schools. And so, last episode, what I did was shared what the law of British Columbia is going to require of what it requires most likely of Christian schools. Again, it's uncharted territory, so right now it's kind of a waiting game to see how things play out in court, if there's lawsuits concerning this and the Christian schools accommodation of transgender students. And then I spent last episode also going through eight issues I think we need to think carefully about or distinguish about, not confuse as we enter into a conversation about this. And there has been lots of debate. In the school that my daughter goes to is walking through this. There's been lots of debate, lots of meetings, lots of discussions, and I think that's really good. I don't think it was, like I said last episode, these are uncharted waters, new territory for all of us, and so it's to be expected that lively debate would happen. There's going to be disagreements over this, absolutely. We still need to, and we need to, as Christians, engage together with that, be willing to disagree, still love each other, but there's going to be disagreement over this, and we need to hammer this out, work our way through this. So all of that is good, and to be expected. So we shouldn't become frustrated with the process. There's going to be frustrating elements of it for sure because of some of the disagreements that are going to take place, but I think it's healthy that that's happening. Hopefully, what I do here adds more light than heat, but who knows? So what I want to do today is I want to talk right now about the importance of the whole debate, the importance of this issue, kind of what's at stake, why it matters, why we have to be careful about every decision we make. One of the points I made last time, one of the 8 areas of confusion was, or things that we need to think carefully about, is that there's this idea that this is just another Christian debate, surrounding this debate surrounding the school's response to transgender students it's been minimized, I think you could say, as just another Christian debate, such as marriage, divorce, remarriage, or male-female roles, especially in leadership and these things that have taken place over the last couple of years. I think if you were to look at these debates, that you would most likely come to the conclusion that these are not comparable, that they're not analogous. And I think that we can see that because in the marriage, divorce, remarriage debates, no one is denying the divine institution of marriage itself. No one is questioning what marriage is at its fundamental level. The kind of the natural law of marriage and the divine institution of marriage, right? Either way, and no one was in that debate was saying that the divorce was good. Likewise, in the discussion of male-female roles, no one is denying the fundamental categories of male-female, right? The biology remains intact there. But the question was about the roles in there. And I think that it's been also pointed out that, I think that those debates assume a male-female gender binary, and it's been pointed out that even when we consider homosexuality, there's a basic acceptance of the biological difference between the two genders, that there's two genders, they're distinct. But what we encounter in transgender ideology is a rejection of nature, a rejection of the fundamental nature of sexual identity, of biological sex. And so it's different in that way. It's a denial of what it is, a real confrontation with reality. And what seems to be taking place as a determining factor is the individual's inward feelings. So the most Carl Trueman has done a great job of kind of explaining how we've got to a point in society where the largest or most important authority for whom I am is my inward feeling. That's my true self, what I feel inside. And I would highly recommend reading his book. He's got two now on this subject. His first one was a little more weighty, kind of harder to read, academic, but highly recommended. And I think if I remember correctly, The Rise and the Triumph of the Modern Self. And then he recently has released kind of a smaller volume, easier to read for people who just want the gist of it. And I believe that one's called Strange New World. I would highly recommend it. He just lays out kind of looking at the history, how we have arrived at a society where it's the inward being, that the inward self, which is the true and authentic self. Right? Self-invention and self-expression have sovereign authority, and biology is subservient to the individual's feelings or desires. So this is really a problem for Christians, right? And sometimes we as Christians are a little confused in this area as well. The Christian faith does not have a concept for the whole person that is apart from their body. The human person is understood holistically as a body and a soul. So in Christianity, the body is not irrelevant, it is not evil, it's not dispensable. It is an integral part of who the person is. Right? God created Adam and Eve. He breathed life into their bodies, right? Male and female. They had bodies and it was very good. And the male and female sex, the male and female persons, the human persons, together were an expression of God's image. And so Christianity does not see the body as insignificant. It's an integral part of who a person is. And biological men cannot be women, and biological women cannot be men. And so to say otherwise is to engage in a lie. And so I know when I say that comes off harsh. It's jarring in the cultural climate to say those kind of things. But what I want to make clear is when I say that biological men cannot be women and biological women cannot be men, and to say otherwise is to engage in a lie, I am not, that is not to deny that some people struggle immensely with their sexuality and feelings and desires to be a gender they are not. I'm not minimizing that, and I'm not saying that is not a real struggle for some people. I am also not saying that all persons experiencing gender dysphoria are purposefully engaging in a willful deception or lying about how they feel. Okay, so I'm not saying those things. When I say that to say that men can be women, women can be men, is to engage in a lie, I'm not saying those things, right? What I am saying when I say that it's engage in a lie is to affirm to affirm that a man can be a woman or a woman can be a man. I am saying it is to engage in a profound lie about the nature of reality. It's a lie to say biology doesn't matter and is not a determining factor in your sex. It's a lie to say we can be other than what we were born as. That's what I am saying. Okay, so I'm saying that it is to engage in a profound lie about the nature of reality. So how we help those who struggle, we need to be engaged, though, in helping those who are struggling with gender dysphoria. That's a very critical question. How do we help? So the thing is that many, including governments and medical professionals, would have us believe that the only help, or the best way to help, is to accept the individual's desires and to affirm them. This is the approach of accommodation. It's a gender affirming accommodation. The problem for Christians is that the Bible has a very clear sexual ethic. It outlines sexual sins very clearly. And you might say, well, there's debates on all of this. Yes, I know that, but it's the Bible is very clear. Whether we like what it says or not, it's very clear on its sexual ethic. And like all other sins, we are to resist temptation and practice of those sins. So from a Christian perspective, that the best course of action cannot be to affirm and accommodate the individual's desires when those desires are aberrant or sinful. So a recent article I read by a group of scholars who are part of the Evangelicals and Catholics Together. They I think they accurately described the cultural climate, saying, in our time, the current rule of law denies nature and usurps the authority of God, making the powers of this world into supreme lawgivers. Secularism is, I think most would agree with me that secularism is the dominant posture of our politicians. We have this whole false dichotomy between church and state. We like to, I'll say, pretend that exists, but I think secularism is kind of the dominant posture that our politicians take. So in that, what happens is that there's no room to recognize natural law or divine authority. Right? What is revealed to us just in the way God has created nature, and divine authority, what he's spoken to us in his word. There's no room for those. And so this denial of transcendent truth results really in these, whatever worldly rulers, whatever government is, as the supreme authority. And I think the consequences of this can be devastating, are devastating. I think this is pictured really prophetically by George Orwell in his dystopian novel 1984. I don't think many of you have read it. Maybe many of you haven't. I just highly recommend you read it. I read it years and years ago, but I recently reread it and was just kind of astounded at some of the things that the way the story goes and some of how we see our own society. But for those who haven't read it, the book tells the story of a man, Winston Smith, and he's been quietly fighting against the kind of totalitarian ruling party. And he's kind of fighting against that in the sense that he's thinking on his own. Now, Big Brother, the ruling party, is they watch everything, they know everything, and so they understand that Winston's been doing this. Now, he's been in a somewhat chilling scene. He's detained for these kind of thought crimes, for thinking on his own, and they're going to teach him submission. He has to be taught submission. So he's hooked up to this shock machine, electric shock machine, to be reconditioned. And the man kind of leading the whole thing is his name is O'Brien. And so he explains to Winston in this scene, before they start to recondition him or begin the process of reconditioning, they explain to Winston why he's been arrested. He says, O'Brien says to Winston, "You are here because you failed in humility, in self-discipline. You would not make the act of submission, which is the price of sanity. You preferred to be a lunatic." If you just stop there, like that's really interesting, isn't it? You see what O'Brien is doing, right? To think other than the ruling party, the ideology they teach, you are the lunatic, right? And so he's, how he flips everything over, right? You're the lunatic, we're the sane. And just listen to how this goes on, right? O'Brien says, "You believe that reality is something objective, external, existing in its own right. You also believe the nature of reality is self-evident. But I tell you, Winston, that reality is not external. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else. not in the individual mind, which can make mistakes and in any case soon perishes, only in the mind of the party, which is collective and immortal. Whatever the party holds to be truth is truth. So the scene goes on, and I'm going to read a fair portion here because I think it's quite powerful. It goes on, and O'Brien says, "Winston, do you remember writing in your diary, 'Freedom is the freedom to say 2 + 2 make 4'? Yes," said Winston. O'Brien held up his left hand, its back towards Winston, with the thumb hidden and the 4 fingers extended. "How many fingers am I holding up, Winston?" 4. "And if the party says that it's not 4 but 5, then how many?" 4. The wording ended in a gasp of pain. The needle of the dial shot up to 55. O'Brien watched him, the fingers still extended. He drew back the lever. This time the pain was only slightly eased. "How many fingers, Winston?" 4. The needle went up to 60. "How many fingers, Winston?" 4. 4. What else can I say? 4. And he's electrocuted again. "How many fingers, Winston?" 4. Stop it. Stop it. How can you go on? 4. 4. "How many fingers, Winston?" 5. 5. 5. "No, Winston, that is no use. You are lying. You still think there are 4. How many fingers, please?" 4. 5. 4. Anything you like, only stop it. Stop the pain. And the scene goes on uncomfortably until O'Brien is satisfied with some progress. And so it goes on and says, how can I help it?" Winston says. He blubbers. "How can I help seeing what is in front of my eyes? 2 and 2 are 4. "Sometimes, Winston. Sometimes they are 5. Sometimes they are 3. Sometimes they are all of them at once. You must try harder. It's not easy to become sane." And then again, electrocution. "How many fingers am I holding up, Winston?" "I don't know. I don't know. You will kill me if you do that again. 4, 5, 6. In all honesty, I don't know." "Better," said O'Brien. It's a chilling scene. Today we're being told by groups in our society, governments, other experts, that we must call a man a woman or a woman a man if they desire. Right? The civil authorities have sided with O'Brien. Reality exists only in the human mind, with the refusal to acknowledge nature and divine authority. They reject transcendent truth and become the sole authority and take it upon themselves to determine what it means to be human and what is a good life, what constitutes human well-being. And that's what the authorities have come to is in conflict with what God has said. Okay, so the problem of accommodation in a Christian school. The problem of accommodation, Christian schools teach from a biblical worldview. This includes teaching a sexual ethic, which includes, right, teaching that marriage is between a biological man, a biological woman. Sexual relationships are only valid within the bounds of a marriage. Homosexuality is sinful. All of this assumes and promotes a healthy sexuality. The scripture holds to a gender binary of male, female. All of this. It excludes homosexuality and transgenderism as aberrant sexual expressions. That's not to say that teaching from a biblical worldview that classes such as sex education, social studies, science classes in the Christian school should not teach on these topics. They should teach on these topics. In the higher grades, when it's appropriate, they need to help their students think through these topics, to guide them through these topics, to help them think critically, and to be ready to engage in cultural issues from a Christian worldview. And they'll also have to teach in a way that understands some of the students in that classroom are going to be struggling with some of the issues, that the sexual sins, the sexual issues that are considered sinful. And so it has to be done in a very wise way, but in a way that is truthful and loving. So this is where the problem of accommodation becomes apparent, right? Although Christian schools are not churches, they play an essential role in forming disciples of Christ. To accommodate any behavior that goes against God's law or natural law creates an ugly ditch between faith and practice. And we want to avoid that, right? If a Christian school teaches a biblical sexual ethic and then makes accommodations that affirm a practice that we don't support, that creates an ugly ditch, right, between faith and practice, right? If we teach something and then accommodate a practice that we don't support, that's not edifying for anyone. That's not helpful for anyone. That does not show a love of goodness, truth, and beauty, but it confuses a lot of people, including students. Sorry, you might hear some yelling in the background. A lot of people in the house today. It not only this, but we engage in a lie and ask others to participate in a lie also, right? That lie of, a lie about the nature of reality. Essentially, we are saying 2 and 2 in the classroom when we teach 2 and 2 equal 4, but when you walk out into the hallways, into the community, what we practice is 2 and 2 equal 5 or 4 or 3, whatever you want. So it is ultimately unloving to do something or to promote a practice which you deny as truth. Like I had said in the previous podcast, love is complex. Right? Our response to anyone struggling with a sexual orientation issue, a gender identity issue, our response must be loving, and that love it includes compassion, it includes mercy, it also includes truth and wisdom, right? And in any situation where someone struggles with a sinful behavior, the answer is not to foster that behavior, but to help the person out of that struggle or with that struggle, right? To accommodate is to affirm, to accommodate transgenderism in the Christian school is to affirm the unhealthy, unreal, confused desires of a person struggling through a very deep issue, a very deep sexual issue. And the whole, now what we can say is the whole Christian community struggles with sin, right? But I'm dealing here with the whole transgender issue, but the whole Christian community struggles with sin. It is never, ever the appropriate response for the community to accommodate an individual's aberrant practices, sinful practices. The approach of a Christian community is never to conform to a person's sinful desires, but rather the whole community is to conform to the image of Christ, right? Therefore, at the fundamental level of how a school responds must be to make every accommodation that promotes Christ-likeness in the students. To make an accommodation that goes against that is not, we can't do that, right? The school must be making every accommodation. The goal of the school, the purpose of the school must be a place to create an environment to make everything to make every accommodation that promotes Christ likeness, not the contrary, in the students. So I hope that we can that's a fairly agreeable point. So if we agree that transgenderism is an aberrant sexual practice, which I think that's fairly reasonable given the scriptural what the sexual ethic we have, if we agree that transgenderism is wrong, its ideology and practice are contrary to God's design and harmful to the person, the community, and the society, then the question of accommodation then really is answered for us. Disciples are not to accommodate this, right? Love never accommodates, endorses, supports, or normalizes sinful practice. Love does not seek to love does seek to redeem those from slavery to sin and its death promoting desires, right? And again, when I say that, that's because sin always results in death, right? Sinful actions always result in death, no matter what they are. And so love seeks to redeem those who are in slavery to sin and its goal of death. And telling the truth is part of the complex of loving action, right? And so if there is no accommodation, then what do we do, right? This is the difficult question. Right? How do we love these students? What's the school's role in their discipleship? Right? The refusal of accommodation doesn't equal hatred, but what are we doing? What is it that we should do? Well, this is, if we can't accommodate, how do we respond, right? I think that in the first thing that we want to do is be patient. I think we need to be very patient. I don't think we should allow the pressures of all this to stir us up to make decisions that we're going to regret. The demand for gender-affirming accommodation for a student experiencing gender confusion is the government's chosen method to offer help to these students. Okay, so the government is saying the gender-affirming accommodation approach is the approach that we must take. That is the best. However, I think we all need to agree that this phenomenon is so new, the theories and the ideologies are evolving at such a rapid pace, that that itself gives a legitimate reason to make no rash decisions, including following government mandates on this issue. An example of how the things are evolving so rapidly, and there's very little in terms of long-term studies being done in the whole area of how the gender affirming approach is what in the long run, the effect that this has, and that the medical transitioning approach, like the gender affirming medical approach, apart from just the social accommodations. We don't have long-term studies on how this plays out. These are just starting to roll out, I think, from my understanding. But the fact that this is evolving and there's disagreement even within the medical professional studying in this field is clear. This is reason enough to take a very slow approach as to what we do here. I think an example of this is that just recently the Gender Exploratory Therapy Association released a clinical guide on how to help youth who are struggling with gender dysphoria, and this just shows that there's disagreement within this whole area on this issue. So they recently released a new clinical guide to help youth struggling with gender dysphoria. And this guide advocates for an approach that is contrary to the gender affirmative approach. They advocate a exploratory approach. And if you were to go to their website, you can read this. It's very interesting. I would recommend you do that. It's quite lengthy, but I am going to read quite a large portion from their introduction and then a few pages in the beginning material, but I think it's very helpful for us. So if you would just allow me, I'm going to read you some excerpts here. The exploratory approach outlined here in this guide stands in contrast to the gender affirmative approach, which has gained popularity in recent years. The gender affirmative approach assumes that minors presenting with a wish to live in a gender role different from their sex are transgender, and that the primary role of the therapist is to help minors transition. Transition consists of varying combinations of social transition, so like accommodation, medical interventions, and surgical procedures. Early gender transition promoted by the gender affirmative model can be associated with potential short-term benefits, including reduced feelings of anxiety and depression or fewer reported thoughts of self-harm. However, it is associated with significant risks. These risks include compromised bone density, brain development, cardiovascular complications, neoplasms, and other dangers. So those are a lot of them in terms of the medical transitioning that's happening or being promoted, gender-affirming medical kind of stuff. This are long-term and hormone therapy and stuff like this. And so carrying on, there is also a growing concern that many of the adverse effects of these interventions will emerge in years to come. Further recent research suggests that between 10 to 30% of young people and adults who undergo gender transition discontinue it within 16 months to 5 years, sometimes experiencing significant regret over the irreversible physical changes. Clinical experience, media coverage, and online testimonials where thousands of young people share tragic stories of inappropriate gender transitions show that this is an uncertain, rapidly evolving, and understudied issue. Early gender transition also poses a key ethical dilemma. According to the treatment protocol outlined by the Endocrine Society, which is supported by only low-quality evidence, minors undergoing gender transition are likely to be infertile for life with little opportunity for fertility preservation. There is also emerging concern about future sexual dysfunction. This means that children as young as 9 to 12 may be waiving their future right to sexual function and reproduction long before they are mature enough to comprehend the importance of these functions. This is especially alarming since gender-related distress is a common development phase of many pre-gay youth who may not discover their sexual orientation until they are more mature. In view of the heavy medical burden and risks associated with medical transition, the uncertain long-term benefits, and low-quality evidence base, a growing number of public health authorities internationally are recognizing that less invasive approaches such as exploratory psychotherapy should be the first-line treatment for youth with gender distress. So here we have a group of mental health professionals are calling into question the whole approach that the BC government is demanding, and that many governments are demanding, the gender affirmative approach, and they're warning that that this is dangerous, and we need to be. There's significant health risks that are coming with this. The gender affirmative approach can cause significant damage in our children, and this should be very important for us as Christians who we understand that children are a gift from the Lord, that we are to care for them, protect them, and make sure that they are raised properly. So we need to take seriously when we make decisions like this. And I know that when I read this study, a lot of there's an emphasis here on the medical the outcomes of doing these, either the hormone therapies or all these, taking these drugs or the medical transitioning. But I do want to say that the social accommodation that they speak of too, when we accommodate, that's affirming the person, and that is not an insignificant part of their walk towards that. Like all these things are combined. And I know that I have heard in the discussion that, there's a high suicide rate of youth who are struggling with gender dysphoria. And that's often put forward as a reason to be gender affirming or to accommodate, because this will release, this releases that anxiety, and then, because there's such a high rate of suicide. What was interesting in this study, this guide, they say that they want to maintain an evidence-based approach to suicidality. So I'm quoting here. It is often claimed that gender-questioning young people are at extreme risk of suicide. The data instead suggests that the risk of this cohort is similar to the suicide rate in young people experiencing a range of mental health issues. Suicidality in young people with gender-related distress should be managed in the same way that it is managed in all other situations. There is little to no evidence that transition reduces the risk of completed suicide, and clinicians should be aware that the risk remains elevated post-affirmation and or medical transition. So that is very revealing too. So they're saying basically that it's not evidence-based to say that they're at an extreme risk of suicide. In fact, post-affirmation and post-medical transition, that it's elevated. Now, of course, I want to just make plain that suicide in any instance is a horrible tragedy and should not be taken lightly, or anyone contemplating suicide needs help, and we should seek to help them. This isn't to minimize, but just to point out that it's not evidence based to say that there is this extreme risk of suicide in this particular group pre-affirmation. Okay, so allow me just to quote just a little more here. The premise of the gender affirmative model of care is that children should be allowed to live in the gender that feels most real or comfortable to that child, and to express that gender with freedom from restriction, aspiration, or rejection. Gender affirmative interventions are social transition, which entail a change of name, pronouns, documents, dress, and other outward gender cues. Medical interventions, primary puberty blockers, cross hormones, and surgical procedures include genital, breast, facial, and other cosmetic surgeries. Some gender-affirming clinicians contend that children and teens know best what they need to live happy and productive lives. I think that anybody who is a reflective parent would understand, or even a reflective person looking back at when they were a young teenager, knew that we weren't making the best decisions. Anyways, going on, most clinicians who provide gender affirmative care mistakenly believe that it is the accepted standard of care. Although the safety and efficacy of a pediatric gender transition have been endorsed by several professional medical societies, the best available evidence suggests that the benefits of gender affirmative interventions are of very low certainty. I started quoting their reference here. Are of very low certainty and must be thoughtfully and deliberately weighed against known risks to fertility, bone, and cardiovascular health. In addition to these known physiological risks, there are also psychosocial risks and as yet unknown long-term medical risks. So basically, we are not aware of all the risks that there's going to be long-term risks here. And so, like I said, I know that schools are not involved in any of the medical procedures, but they are in terms of the social accommodation, in things like pronoun accommodation, dress accommodation, bathroom accommodation. All that feeds into, that accommodation is gender affirming because it is being made. It's accommodation. It's affirming that, and that is, again, places that person on that road to, to these things. And as the study states, there's long time psychological and psychosocial risks that are unknown. So what may be viewed, some may consider just a simple accommodation, which shouldn't be a big problem. It is. It contributes to a much wider issue that is a big problem. Oh, I'm going longer than I thought here. Maybe I should have made 3 episodes. Well, let me do this. If I can grab your attention, let's just say for 5 more minutes. So how do we move forward? Well, I think here is the big thing. Here's the big thing. And we can say the law is not binding. The law of Canada is not binding. And when I say that, I mean that when it contradicts the law of God, we yield to the law of God. But the law of Canada is punishing. And so I think we want to consider this. If we do not accommodate, because for the reasons that, like I said before, that will require civil disobedience. Maybe, right? Civil disobedience may be required. If the government and the rule of law perversely turn against morality and truth, then the Christian church is not bound to the law of the land. And then when that law enforces immorality. So we can and should disobey if it compels us to act contrary to the scripture. However, what we need to know is that if we do, we can expect to be punished. This is a decision that will have to be made by parents and school faculty. This may well be the issue that brings a church to a point of persecution unseen in our country. right? To not accommodate will be seen as unloving and hostile. The government most likely will not tolerate this. It will mean disobeying and sacrifice. It will mean being called bigots, homophobes, haters, repressive. It will mean losing funding, perhaps educational accreditation. So there will be real life losses. It will mean the loss of people who think differently, those who disagree with that action. Loss of friends, real life losses. But it will also mean being faithful. It will also mean that we are being faithful to our Savior. So, how do you move forward? What do you do? And I'll just share some, maybe I think 4 things here, and they're not groundbreaking. They're ones you already know about, and they're not going to really, I think, impact a great deal. But the first thing, I think, is that if a school chooses not to accommodate, they need to make that plain. They need to make it in their application packages, in all of their in their literature where they explain this. They need to make it plain to parents, to students, to faculty, that every student is welcome to the school to be involved in a loving Christian environment. Every student attending the school will be challenged to be a disciple of Christ, and therefore will be challenged to be transformed into His image by the renewing of their minds. That's key to Christian education. So that's the first thing, that is the environment that students will be in. Second, make it clear that the school holds to a biblical worldview, and that means an affirmation of the biblical sexual ethic, and all of that entails, right? So it will teach what is healthy sexuality and what is unhealthy sexuality. That which the scripture calls sin, it will outline, and that which is promoted will be endorsed. And so the school will not accommodate any sexual identity requests. So that needs to be made plain. Third, any student struggling with gender dysphoria, I think, you're going to have students, because of the struggling with this. That's just a fact. You will have students that struggle with gender dysphoria. And it needs to be made plain that these students will be cared for by all staff, and they will be treated appropriately, not in accommodating them in the dysphoria, but they will be treated in a manner consistent with the gospel, that they will be loved and cared for. They won't be abused in any way. And the school will work alongside the student, their family, and pastor, insofar as they're able, to help in whatever way that they can to care for a child and to foster them following Christ. In that the schools are not equipped, teachers are not equipped to delve deep into the psychology of this, and so they should just refrain from that. No one should be asked to do something they're not trained to do or whatever. But we can all love and show respect too. Now, respect, of course, doesn't mean that we're going to use the pronouns. Everyone should it should be plain, I guess, in the previous, the application forms for the school, and their outline on this policies, that we use the pronouns that are associated with your sexual gender at birth. Now, trained counselors and psychologists, I think need to be also employed. If the school has means, not every school has means, but this is something like these students need help. This is a good way to help them. Like I said, school needs to work with the pastors, and also, if they have the means, the counselors, to provide counseling for students who may be struggling with this. And the fourth one is just basically me speaking as a pastor. And that is that I know of no way to free people from the confusion that sin causes, from sinful struggles with sin. I know of no other way but to lead them to Christ. Right? Our job is not simply to tell the truth, but to lead people to Christ, who is the truth, and to lead them to Him, because He is the way, the truth, and the life. And that is the most powerful way that we can free people from either their struggles with sin, any confusion they have. And again, this is not an overnight solving. It's not like someone comes to Jesus and, there are times when he frees them immediately. And this is not to say that there won't be lifelong struggles here. But what we need as Christians, what every Christian needs, because all of us struggle with sin, these students and the whole student body they need help, they need compassion, all of those things in a loving environment, but they also need to come to Jesus continually, right? We all need to repent continually, and we all need to receive that assurance of forgiveness. We need to come to be led to worship him, right? And to understand that we have been cleansed by his blood, and that we have been forgiven of our sins. And so the whole student body needs to be encouraged to seek and to understand this, to understand their sin, and to seek to die from it, to die to it, sorry. So I hope those are not groundbreaking. I hope that helps. It's a little longer, the second episode here. I hope that was helpful for you. And thank you for listening. And as I sign off here, I just may God richly bless you in the grace and mercy that's been won by Jesus Christ in his vicarious death on the cross for all of your sins. Would you go in that truth and rejoice with that, the peace that gives? Okay, bye now.